And sometimes those truths have the power to bring the most powerful men to their knees. The mansion was quiet that night, but not peaceful. Silence can sometimes be the loudest sound of all, especially when it's filled with regret. The staff had returned to their duties, though none could look at their employer the same way. The echo of what had happened still lingered in the marble halls. The air felt heavier, colder, like the house itself was ashamed. Amara sat on the edge of her small bed in the servants' quarters, staring at her trembling hands. Her knuckles were scraped, her scalp burned from where he had pulled her hair, and her eyes were swollen from tears. But it wasn't the physical pain that hurt the most. It was the humiliation. She had been dragged like a criminal, called worthless, and accused of hurting the very child she loved as her own. Her mind replayed every second, the look in his eyes, the sound of her name shouted like an insult, the weight of everyone's silence. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Don't cry anymore, Amara. Don't cry." But the tears came anyway. Down the hall, Richard Kingsley sat alone in his office. The lights were dim, the city outside glowing through the glass windows. He stared at his reflection, the face of a man who had everything the world could offer, but still felt like nothing. His hands, once symbols of authority, now trembled with guilt. He had built empires, commanded respect in every boardroom, yet tonight, a maid's silence had broken him more than any business rival ever could. The memory of Lily's scream, her small, terrified voice shouting "Stop!" still rang in his ears. He rubbed his temples and whispered, "What have I become?" The next morning came too soon. Sunlight spilled through the long glass corridors, but the mansion still felt dim. The household routine had resumed, yet the energy had changed. The staff spoke in hushed tones, careful, tense. Amara rose early, as she always did. Her body ached, but she forced herself to work. For her, dignity came through duty, through not allowing her pain to be her identity. When she entered the dining hall to serve breakfast, she noticed Richard sitting at the head of the table. His face looked different, tired, older, haunted. Lily sat beside him, silent, her eyes red from crying through the night. When Richard's gaze met Amara's, he froze. He didn't bark orders this time. He didn't even raise his head proudly. He just looked. She bowed her head slightly and whispered, "Good morning, sir." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Amara, please, sit." The entire room seemed to stop breathing. The maids exchanged confused glances. No servant had ever been asked to sit at that table before, not in this house. Amara hesitated. "Sir, I can't—" "I insist," he said softly. His voice lacked the power it once had. Slowly, she approached and sat down, her posture straight, her eyes guarded. Richard cleared his throat. "Lily told me everything again this morning. About the vase, about the lie, about your kindness." Amara nodded slightly, saying nothing. He continued, "I've been awake all night thinking about what I did. There's no excuse for it. I let anger turn me into someone I swore I'd never be." His eyes flickered with emotion. "You didn't deserve that. No one does." Amara looked down at her folded hands. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, when she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm, like calm water hiding a strong current beneath. "Sir, do you know what hurt the most?" she asked quietly. Richard shook his head slowly. "It wasn't the pain," she said. "It was how easily you believed I could do something so cruel. You didn't ask, you didn't listen. You saw my skin, my uniform, and decided I must be guilty." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "I've worked here for 2 years. I've fed your daughter, stayed up nights when she was sick, cleaned this house like it was my own. I've respected you even when you didn't see me. But yesterday—" She paused, holding back tears. "You made me feel less than human." The words struck Richard like a blow. His throat tightened. He looked down at his plate, unable to meet her eyes. "Amara," he said softly, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make this right." Amara took a deep breath. "It's not about forgiveness, sir. It's about understanding." He looked up, confused. She continued, "People like me, we come to homes like this not just for money. We come because we believe kindness still exists somewhere, because we believe good people use their power to lift others, not break them. But yesterday, you showed everyone the opposite." Her voice grew stronger, steadier with every word. "You showed your daughter that it's okay to hurt someone who can't fight back. That being rich means being right, and that's not what she should grow up believing." The room was utterly still. Even Lily, small and silent, listened with wide eyes. Amara's eyes softened as she turned toward the little girl. "Lily is a good child. She just made a mistake, but now she needs to see something more important than power." Richard blinked, his voice quiet. "What's that?" Amara's gaze met his. "Humility." The word landed heavy, deep. "You can rebuild your business if it falls," she said. "You can buy a new house, a new car, a new vase, but you can't buy back the respect of those who see who you are when no one's watching." Richard felt a sting behind his eyes. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but he couldn't. Every word she said was the truth he had avoided his whole life. For years he had believed power made him untouchable. But this morning, sitting across from a woman he had wronged, he realized power without decency was nothing but weakness dressed in gold. He finally said, voice low, "You're right." Amara looked down, her tone softening. "I don't want your pity, Mr. Kingsley. I just want respect. For myself, for every person who works in homes like this. We're not shadows. We're not disposable. We're people." She stood, adjusting her uniform, and added gently, "That's all we ever ask." Lily suddenly got up from her chair and ran to Amara, wrapping her arms tightly around her. "Amara, I love you," she whispered. Amara knelt and hugged her back, tears glistening in her eyes. "I love you too, sweetheart." Richard watched them, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. He stood slowly, walking toward them. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, nothing like the thunderous roar from the night before. "Amara," he said, "you're right. I can't undo what I did. But I promise, from today on, no one in this house will ever be treated as less than human again." He paused, his eyes wet. "And as long as I live, I'll make sure my daughter learns what I failed to see. That the truest measure of a person's worth isn't in their money. It's in their heart." Amara nodded slowly. "Then teach her that, sir. That's how you make things right." That day, the mansion felt different. For the first time, the air carried warmth instead of fear. The other maids smiled softly as Amara passed. The butler nodded respectfully. Even the guards greeted her with a quiet, "Good morning, ma'am." The storm had passed, but the lesson it left behind would never fade. In a world of diamonds and chandeliers, it took a maid's pain to show what real power looked like. It wasn't money. It wasn't control. It was respect. And for the first time, the billionaire understood the true cost of the word he had almost forgotten. Days passed, but the memory of that morning refused to fade. The mansion was quieter now, not with fear, but with reflection. The shouting had stopped. The hurried footsteps, the whispers of judgment, they were gone. In their place lingered something softer, something fragile, like the calm after a heavy storm. Amara continued her duties as she always had. But this time, when she walked through the halls, heads didn't turn away. The staff looked at her with quiet admiration. They knew what had happened. They knew she had stood before the most powerful man in the city and spoken truth without trembling. Yet Amara wasn't proud. She wasn't angry anymore either. She was just tired. Tired of proving her worth. Tired of being strong, because no one gave her another choice. Each night she sat by her small window in the servants' quarters, looking out over the glittering city lights. The world outside seemed so beautiful, so vast, but to her it had always felt distant, like something meant for other people. She whispered softly to herself, "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to live." And still, deep down, she wondered if people like her ever truly got to live free. Meanwhile, in his massive office overlooking the city, Richard Kingsley couldn't escape his own thoughts. He had always believed that success could silence guilt, that numbers, contracts, and skyscrapers could drown out conscience. But now, every time he saw his reflection, he didn't see a billionaire. He saw a broken man. He remembered the fear in Amara's eyes when he had dragged her by the hair, the helplessness, the shame, and the way she'd stood up the next morning and spoken with more grace than he ever had in his life. He hadn't been able to sleep properly since that day. Not even his whiskey or pills could dull the ache that had settled in his chest. His daughter Lily had changed too. She no longer threw tantrums or demanded everything she wanted. Sometimes, Richard would find her quietly helping Amara in the kitchen, wiping the counters, setting the table, asking about her day. And each time, Richard's heart clenched, because it reminded him that one woman, one maid, had done more to shape his daughter's character in a week than he had done in years. One evening, about a week later, Richard called for Amara. She was surprised when the butler told her, "Mr. Kingsley would like to see you in the garden." The garden, not the office, not the dining hall. The garden was his late wife's favorite place, a sacred corner of the mansion that he hadn't set foot in for years. Amara hesitated before walking down the stone path. The air was cool, scented with jasmine. The soft hum of crickets filled the quiet. Under the golden glow of the garden lights, Richard stood near the old oak bench, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sir," Amara said softly. He turned. His face looked weary but different, gentler, as if something within him had shifted. "Amara," he greeted, voice calm. "Thank you for coming." She gave a polite nod. "How can I help you, sir?" He gestured toward the bench. "Please sit." She hesitated again, but then sat, carefully, respectfully, her posture straight as always. For a moment neither spoke. The sound of rustling leaves filled the silence. Finally, Richard said, "I've been thinking a lot since that day. About you. About Lily. About me." Amara said nothing. She just listened, her eyes calm but watchful. "I grew up believing that money was everything," he continued, "that if you had enough of it, people would respect you, love you, even fear you. And for years, I lived that way. I treated people like they were replaceable, because I thought I was above them." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But the night I hurt you, Amara, I saw myself clearly for the first time. I saw a man with everything, except decency." Amara looked down, her fingers interlocked. Her voice was quiet. "It's not too late to change, sir." He nodded slowly. "That's what I'm trying to do. but I can't begin until I understand something." She lifted her gaze to meet his. "That day," he said, voice trembling slightly, "when I dragged you, when I shouted at you, you screamed something. One word. And I can't get it out of my head." Amara's brow furrowed. "One word?" He nodded. "Yes. When I had my hand in your hair, when I was full of rage, you screamed it, and it stopped me. It froze me." He swallowed hard. "You screamed, 'Respect.'" The memory hit her like a wave. She hadn't even realized she'd shouted it. It had come from deep within, from the part of her that had been silenced, dismissed, overlooked her whole life. Richard continued, his voice shaking. "That word, it broke me. I've heard people shout 'stop' or 'don't,' but no one has ever shouted that at me before." He looked away, eyes glistening. "Respect. A word so simple, yet so powerful. You weren't begging for mercy. You were demanding dignity. And that's what shattered me." Amara's heart softened. She hadn't wanted to break him. She'd only wanted him to see. Richard continued, "All my life, I demanded respect from others, my employees, my competitors, even my own family. But I never gave it. Not truly. Not to those who deserved it most." He turned to face her. "You changed that, Amara. You made me see what I couldn't buy." For a long time, neither spoke. The night breeze brushed gently through the trees. Then Amara said softly, "Respect isn't given to those who have power, sir. It's earned by those who use power kindly." Richard's throat tightened. "I understand that now." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I've arranged something for you. A scholarship fund. For your education, your family's future, whatever you choose." Amara's eyes widened. "Sir, I can't." He shook his head. "Please, don't refuse it. It's not charity. It's me trying to do one right thing in a lifetime of wrong ones." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, sir." He smiled faintly. "No, Amara. Thank you. You gave me something I thought I already had but never truly earned. Humanity." Amara looked at him for a long moment before saying quietly, "If that's true, then teach it to Lily. That's how you honor it." He nodded. "I will. Every day." For the first time, they both smiled, genuinely, without barriers. The word that once echoed in anger had now become a bridge between them. Respect. It had broken the chains of pride, shattered years of silence, and humbled a man who once believed he owned the world. As Amara stood to leave, she turned and said gently, "We all make mistakes, Mr. Kingsley, but only some of us choose to learn from them. That's what makes the difference." He nodded. "You've taught me that difference." That night, Richard returned to the house and found Lily asleep in her bed, clutching the small doll Amara had once sewn for her. He knelt beside her, brushing her hair gently. He whispered, "I'll be better, my love. Because of her, I'll be better." He kissed her forehead and turned off the light. Then, for the first time in years, Richard walked to the servants' quarters, not to command, but to apologize. He thanked every maid, every guard, every gardener by name. The mansion that had once echoed with arrogance now carried something new, gratitude. And in that quiet transformation, Amara's voice, her one word, continued to echo not just in those marble walls, but in the heart of the man who had once believed himself untouchable. It wasn't wealth that changed him. It wasn't guilt. It was respect. A word that began as a scream, but ended as a promise. The world outside the Kingsley mansion had no idea what had happened behind its tall iron gates. But secrets have a strange way of finding light, especially when they carry the weight of truth. Weeks passed since that night in the garden. The mansion had changed, not in its marble or gold, but in its spirit. The same halls that once carried the echo of commands and footsteps now carried laughter. The tension had melted away, replaced by something rare in a house of power: peace. Richard Kingsley was no longer the same man who had once ruled through fear. The staff noticed it first. He started greeting them in the mornings. He asked for their names, their families, their stories. He listened. He even joined the kitchen staff one evening, rolling up his sleeves to help serve dinner. At first they thought it was guilt, but with time they realized it was transformation. Amara too felt the difference. She no longer walked in fear. She held her head high, her steps confident, her heart lighter. Yet even as things changed, she knew something still remained undone. Richard's apology, though sincere, had been private. And while it meant the world to her, she couldn't ignore the truth that men like him often hurt others, and got away with it because no one ever saw. And then one morning the world did see. Richard's PR team had scheduled his annual press conference, a grand event held every year at the Kingsley Foundation. It was supposed to be about charity, expansion, and numbers. A room full of reporters, cameras, and businessmen ready to praise the billionaire. But this time, Richard had something very different in mind. When he arrived that morning, dressed in a simple grey suit instead of his usual designer black, everyone noticed the change. The arrogance that once radiated from him was gone. In its place was a calm, grounded man with tired eyes, but eyes that finally saw. The reporters filled the hall, murmuring with curiosity. When he stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. "Good morning," Richard began, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Thank you for being here today. Normally this conference would be about numbers, profits, projects, expansions. But today, it's about something far more important." A flicker of confusion spread among the journalists. Cameras clicked. Richard continued. "A few weeks ago, I made a mistake. A terrible one. One that revealed who I truly was. Not the man in suits and headlines, but the man behind closed doors." He paused, taking a slow breath. "I hurt someone who worked for me. A woman of great strength and kindness. I humiliated her, accused her without proof, and treated her as if her worth was less than mine." The room was dead silent now. The media had never seen Richard Kingsley speak this way. He looked directly into the cameras. "Her name is Amara." A ripple of whispers spread across the crowd. "She worked in my home. She cared for my daughter. And in a moment of blind rage and arrogance, I treated her with cruelty. But that night, she said one word that changed everything. Respect." The cameras zoomed in. Richard's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "She didn't beg me to stop. She didn't plead for mercy. She demanded respect. And that one word broke me. Because I realized that for all my wealth, for all my power, I had never earned the thing I demanded most from others." He paused, emotion tightening his throat. "I had lived my entire life thinking respect was something you could buy, but that woman in her pain taught me that respect is something you give before you ever expect it back." The crowd sat frozen. No one typing, no one whispering, just listening. Richard stepped aside and gestured toward the side of the stage. "Today I invited her here, because it's not enough to apologize behind closed doors. The world needs to hear her voice." In the side entrance, Amara appeared. She wasn't dressed in her maid uniform anymore. She wore a simple white dress, her natural hair free, her posture proud. The cameras turned to her instantly, flashes lighting the room like a storm. She walked slowly to the podium, her heart pounding, but her gaze steady. "Good morning," she began softly. "I didn't come here to shame anyone. I came because I believe people can change, if they truly want to." Her voice carried through the hall, calm but commanding. "A few weeks ago, I was dragged, insulted, and made to feel invisible. It broke something inside me. But when I shouted that word, respect, I wasn't just shouting at him. I was shouting at a world that often sees people like me as less. Poor, black, a maid, a worker. But we are human. We are worthy." She looked at Richard briefly, then back at the cameras. "I don't want revenge. I want awareness. I want every employer, every powerful person watching this to remember. The people who clean your floors, cook your meals, and raise your children, they are not beneath you. They're the foundation you stand on." The hall erupted in quiet applause, rising slowly into thunderous clapping. Even the reporters, hardened by years of scandals and stories, stood in respect. Richard wiped his eyes discreetly. When Amara turned toward him, she smiled faintly. He leaned into the microphone once more. "From this day forward, the Kingsley Foundation will establish the Respect Initiative, a fund dedicated to protecting the rights and education of domestic workers around the country. Every worker deserves fair pay, dignity, and protection. And this," he looked toward Amara, "is her idea." The applause grew louder. For the first time in his public career, Richard wasn't praised for his wealth, but for his humanity. That night, news channels across the world carried the story. Billionaire publicly apologizes to Maid after abuse allegation, launches global respect initiative. Clips of Amara's calm, fearless speech went viral. People called her the maid who spoke truth to power. But Amara didn't chase the fame. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to live with dignity and help others do the same. When she returned home that evening, Lily was waiting by the gate, holding a bouquet of flowers. "For you, Amara," the little girl said shyly. "Daddy said flowers are for people we admire." Amara knelt down, smiling as she took the bouquet. "Thank you, sweetheart." Lily hugged her tightly. "Daddy's different now. You made him good again." Amara felt tears sting her eyes as she whispered, "No, darling. He chose to be good. I just reminded him how." A month later, Richard visited the small town where Amara's family lived. He came without cameras, without reporters, just himself. He helped rebuild their community center, donated books to the local school, and made sure every worker there had fair wages and health care. But more than the money, it was his humility that touched people. He sat with the workers, ate with them, listened to their stories. He laughed, he learned, he became human again. And through it all, he never forgot that one word, the word that had brought him down and lifted him higher than all his billions ever could. Respect. Years later, Amara would open her own foundation, a school for young girls from poor backgrounds, teaching them to believe in their worth. At the entrance, engraved in stone, were the words, "Respect is not given to power. It is given to kindness." Richard attended the opening, his hair now graying, his eyes soft. He stood beside her, not as her employer, but as her friend. They both smiled at the crowd of children laughing and running around the new schoolyard. And for a moment, all the pain, all the anger, all the mistakes of the past faded into something beautiful. Redemption. Because sometimes it only takes one word to change everything. One word to break the chains. One word to build a bridge. One word to heal a heart. That word was respect.